Shut up and sit down.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, or even evening if you somehow are tuning in from, well, the continent, European continent. I guess if you're in Asia, it's very early morning, or in that area. All right, let's turn off the music. Kind of like that one, though. Again, that's the same royalty-free music. I'll put a link in the show notes to it. I know you're dying to see me. Hold on, it's coming, it's coming. Here we go. So today, you are super lucky because not only do we have Hetty chewing on an antler. They love antlers. But we also have... Oh, she's the other side. Hold on. We also have Aya. Oh, she's a good girl. Yes, you are. She is jonesing for Hetty's antler. So, but Hetty is very intent on her antler today. So that will not be happening right now. You'll notice some of the posters are down. Big changes there. Big changes. Big changes coming. Big changes coming. Today's tea, the usual one. The mug itself comes from Budapest, from an Apache conf, where this is a handcrafted artisan one. It used to have a little tea strainer inside, but it cracked. But it wasn't a very good tea strainer also, because the holes were just the holes were just in the bottom, and so it wouldn't make tea very well. But I love the color pattern. Can you guys see that? I love that color pattern. And so it makes me happy, and so I still keep using the mug quite a bit, even though the strainer's not there. Delicious. Okay. Oh, do you want to see one other thing about Hetty? Watch this. Watch this. Hetty! Good girl. See that tail? I love that about her. You all have to do... Oh, then now Aya needs attention. Can I give her one for saying? Here, hold on. Okay. All right. Let's get to it. So today, we're going to be talking about... It's a continuation in the series of where I consider it a little bit of developer relations, where we're going through a bunch of different documentation sites that I'm familiar with, and reviewing them, just like saying what they get right, what they get wrong, what they could, well, I shouldn't say wrong, what they could improve on. See, positive outlook, in terms of their documentation for application developers. I can't really talk about like sysadmins or DBAs or that other stuff, or all the other, or network administrators, or all these other things, because I don't really have any familiarity. And one of the key features to being able to do a good review is to be empathetic with the target audience you're talking about. And I don't, not that I couldn't have empathy for those people, but I haven't really talked to a lot of those other groups, nor do I know what it's like to live that way. So I don't review from that perspective. Okay. One of the things we learned from last time was I like to talk. So we're going to try to keep this one shorter than last week. All right. So today we're going to be talking about, I actually made slides to try to keep me on track. So let's go ahead and switch to the slides, and we're going to present them. So I want you to remember from last time, remember that kick-ass curve, because this informs a lot of our discussions, right? The idea is we're trying to get users from here to here as quickly as possible, and then when they're up here, helping them stay up here, right? So again, the curve. The full discussion is in the video, which I'll put link to from the show notes, which is 2 of my videos back when I did the Esri developer site. You want people, they start out in a sucky, frustrated state because they can't really do much with what your product or project. And you want to get them up here where they're in a flow state, really great. This is the suck threshold. If they stay below this too long, they'll leave your project, and you want to get them here as fast as possible because that makes them feel awesome. The other thing about developers is they're doers, and they want to do stuff, and the easier you make it for them to do stuff or figure out how to do stuff, the more they'll like you. So, okay? That's the quick review. Let's get to it. So we're going to do PostgreSQL.org docs. I'm going to start with my main points to start with, go through some of them, and then show some examples, and then we'll be done. So the main points, and so I, in going through this, I had to think nice, great, deep, bigly thoughts. It's a mature project with a lot of history. I started using PostgreSQL in 2001, And I think it existed at least 5 years before that, maybe 4, I don't know, 5 or 6 years before that. So it's a project that's been around for a long, long time with a lot of people working on it. So this comes from my evolution. I have a PhD in ecology. My department was also ecology and evolutionary biology. So I took some evolution classes. There's this idea in evolution called canalization, like a canal. And the idea is sometimes once a trait becomes so firmly tuned in the genome, or even in the phenotype, it's very hard to break out of that. And that can happen just because of changes that were made way back in the past, right? Like maybe we didn't have to have spines, but once you got spines way back when, it's very hard to develop another organism without spines, right? To evolve a new organism without spines. So it's that same kind of idea. So choices that were made way back when, and then there's history of documentation and patterns and people who've worked on it and tooling and all that stuff makes it there's a lot of forces working against quick, abrupt changes. So keep that in mind when you think about the project, right? So this is not one that I would like to take on the documentation for, especially given how big the community is too. They also serve a lot of different types of users. So there's sysadmins installing Postgres, there's DBAs running Postgres, there's application developers using Postgres, there's data scientists, there's all sorts of different people using Postgres. This isn't like the Esri site we did before where the main target was developers, right? This is actually a site that serves a lot of different kinds of users. So I'm not actually expecting a developer site, a full-on developer site here. This is just more about the documentation. I think that if I'm knowing the community, if there was a group of users who got together and said, we'd like to make an application developer specific part to the site, I think they would be more than willing to let people do that. It would take a lot of discussion, but I think they would probably allow people to do that. But very few people want to do that. So now let's go. I think they've done a really good job of making it very intuitive and convenient to access different versions of their documentation, which is great because of that long history. There's people who are having to use many different versions, or there's many different versions out in the wild. And so when you come to the site and you want to know, that's great that the latest is this, but I'm all the way 3 versions back because that's what my sysadmins have said. It's very easy to see what was in that version of the doc. They've made that very nice, especially given the way Google works. I'll show you in a second, right? So that makes it really nice. One of the critiques I have is they do a lot of mixing of reference and learning docs. So this isn't very specific to the Postgres site. There's a lot of other sites that do this and I'll put a link into the show notes if I can find the deck again, or it was a blog post or something that talks about there's distinct different types of docs and you should put them in distinct areas. And so there's reference docs, which are like just references for the commands. And this is usually what the people who write the programs write. Then there's learning docs, and those learning docs can even be further split into like task-based, tutorials, and then actually like introductory materials. And those things, you should keep them separate. The learning docs link to the reference docs, but reference docs should be reference docs and clear and concise and relatively small with maybe just a few examples, while the learning docs may have a lot more examples in them. Anyway, I'll show you an example of this later. Sometimes, and this isn't, so the project, I think the way the PostgreSQL works, I'm pretty sure of this, is if you put a new feature into Postgres, you have to write the docs for it. And so there's a lot of different people putting in lots of different features, and they don't have a doc czar, right? Or a benevolent dictator for life for the docs or anything like that. So there's nobody forcing an editorial voice for the whole thing. And so what you end up with is, depending on the feature and the person who wrote it, some of the docs require a bunch of background knowledge without links out to people who don't understand that background knowledge, right? And so if you don't understand it, you're kind of lost, and you have to kind of go do some Google searches and figure that out and then understand it and come back. So some of the examples are they go right from, here's the concept, here's a really crazy complicated example. And maybe I'll show an example or two of that. But it's not in all the docs. That's what I also want to say. Like some parts of the docs do a great job of building progressively more complicated examples, but some don't. So, and then they have a submit correction link on the bottom of every single page, which is awesome. I'm on the PostgreSQL docs list, and I see those coming in all the time. So believe that if you submit something in there, even if it's just a editorial suggestion, like you should think about, it actually gets read and usually discussed by a lot of people there. And there is no task-based stuff or docs that help app developers. But again, as I said earlier, this is not surprising. I would say for the longest time, their community was DBAs, right? And maybe sysadmins who are installing it, not the application developers. So this is not surprising, but from an app developer's perspective, it makes it a little bit harder for me. Like there's no discussion on pooling, connection pooling, or any of that other stuff that if I personally believe that should be part of the Postgres site. A discussion of like how to tune your database for applications, a discussion about connection pooling and why you want to use it, and here are some of the connection pooling things and that kind of stuff. I mean, I know that can be left up to the individual language, but I do think there's parts that can be talked about at the database level, which would be good for application developers to get on the PostgreSQL site. Okay, so those are the main points. Let's go through them, right? So I don't have to show mature projects. I don't have to show lots of different users. I'll show you the very intuitive and easy access to versions. So let's move this out of the way. Bloop, and let's go to the site. So here, I'll go back one more link. This is the documentation site when you go to it, and it's great. It looks a little sparse to most of us because we're expecting the new flashy stuff. That's not what Postgres is about. So it says this section contains current and archived manuals for Postgres users. You can see release notes and a view of books. It's great. Brings you to a lot of stuff. So let's go to current. And you can see right away, there's their different online versions of all the way. These are all the currently supported versions of Postgres. The archive is for even some companies run Postgres way past the supported versions. And so we can go all the way back. I don't know if this is actually the original release of Postgres, but this is pretty far back, given that I think most of these are a year apart, right? So let's go back here though. One of the other things I absolutely love, and this might just be because I'm an old fart, but I can get PDF versions of the documentation. I cannot tell you when I'm working on a plane or I'm traveling or I have bad internet connectivity or I just want to print out a couple pages because sometimes it's just easier for me to read on paper and mark up how beautiful it is to have a PDF version of the doc, right? It doesn't have to be just as fancy or any of the other stuff, but I know the links, I don't even care if the links work between sections, although that's nice if it does. But having a PDF that I can just download, right, or print is just a great thing, right? And then they do the table of contents here, right? I can do whatever I want like that. Oh, it's beautiful. Please do this with your documentation, not just online, okay? But that said, let's do a Google search. And I'll show you the different version, how the different version thing works out. Let's do PostgreSQL create table, right? And we do that, and there's the documentation. Now you'll notice it goes to the 9.1 site, but I've used their doc enough to know that I don't care what version it's actually linking to, because this is the nice part they do. The supported versions is right there across the tops, all the other versions of this page. So I know I'm on version 11. I click there and I get the version 11 of that page, right? So this is great once the users learn the pattern that I can go to any version and get to the current version, right? Or I can click on current. This is usually what I do when I want to put a link to the doc somewhere. I use just current because I know that'll stay current with the most recent version of the doc, right? As opposed to a specific version. And they even have the development version 13, and then even I think that this is probably even the head of development, right? 13, I think, is entering maybe alpha or beta. I think it might be in beta. I don't keep track. I don't worry until it's released. Anyway, so I love that feature that they put it up there. Really nice and easy. No drop downs, no nothing else. I know it takes up some space, but it's okay. I, as a developer, have learned to just quickly go ignore that once I get to my version, and I don't care that it takes up that space there, right? So, and then I get the doc. All right, now let's go. What was the next thing on the list? Let's bring it back. Where'd it go? Whoop. They mix reference and learning docs. So I think, no, that's not what I wanted. What happened here? Where'd my, oh, there we go. Examples. Boop. Can you index a view? This is something so this is an example of reference and learning docs, right? So in the learning docs, I had the question, can I index a view? All right. And so I'm like, okay, I'll do a Google search and see what I get, or I'll look at the first piece, which is indexes. You know, there's a topic in the documentation called indexes. That seems like a great place where I could find out about whether I should be able to index a view. So this is a learning doc, but you would think in the beginning of the learning doc, you would say something in the introduction like, this is an index, here's what it does, and here's the things you can apply it to. But if I do a search on view, there is no view. It doesn't talk about views at all in here. It turns out I have to go to the reference doc, which I think is not, the learning material should have covered this right in the very beginning, right? So that's the one we just went to. But if we go here, oh, it's not a link. Hold on. Let me go to the original slides. If I go to the original, if I go here, right in the second sentence? No, where is it? Oh, here we go. Right in the first sentence, right at the beginning, it says, which can be a table or a materialized view. So this is a reference doc. So this is good that it says this in the reference doc, right? But it also should be in the learning doc because that's where I'm trying to learn the stuff here. The other thing I think that I sometimes see all this stuff down here, to me, this isn't actually reference. This actually might be learning, right? They should have a topic perhaps on you can build indexes concurrently. Maybe there's something about a little bit of references about the specifics of that. There's all these notes. And then there's some examples. And this does a good job of just a few examples. The other problem I will point out is that sometimes this is just the introduction doc, but they can also sometimes in their documentation, which I find hard in the electronic form especially, I think, and this is due to the age of the documentation, but also due to most of the PostgreSQL community is older developers. Not that there's anything wrong with that, myself being one, but we have come to, when I was growing up in the developer community, you would have long pages of docs and you were expected to read the whole page, right? Like you would read the doc. And I don't think that's how most people interact with electronic docs now. They skim. There's a lot of skimming that happens. For me, I skim a lot, even though I like reading books and like reading whole pages. I find it very hard to read on big blocks of text on a screen. And so sometimes if they bury just one concept in the middle of the page, which I've had happen before, where I've said, hey, look, I'm trying to find this concept and this page doesn't talk about it. And then someone on the internal Slack will be like, actually it does, Steve. It does right here. And then I'll go and I'll go, oh yeah, it's like 5 paragraphs deep in a big chunk of text, one sentence, right? So I think this is maybe something to think about in moving forward whenever they go to review a page, is to do a little bit more breaking out and using a bit more headers rather than using the motif of this is a print. You know what, Hetty? Or I am. That's a bit loud. That's a bit loud. Yeah, thank you. Using the headers, using more headers and bold and things like that to call out important topics, things that are specific to that doc. The other thing that I didn't like about this index things is right here in the beginning, it doesn't, I don't think it does. What is this? This is just a link in the SQL commands, right? There's no link to it here, right? There's no link to the reference doc. Like that should have been right in the very beginning. As a matter of fact, if you look, there's a lot, this is one of the other critiques I have. If we look at like another thing here, what was the other one I was looking at earlier today? Where'd it go? Indices, that's that one. Create table. Oh, I forget where it went. I thought I left it up. No, I guess I didn't. Oh well. There was another one that I was looking at earlier today where I wanted to show you guys, but apparently I did not leave it up. Maybe it was in the create table? No, that was the search I did. See, this is another example of the create table has a lot going on here, and there's no way to link directly to these pieces, and there should be links to them. I guess I've made my point with that one. Let's move on. There was another one I was talking about where I was looking at. Oh, it was on the index page. Hold on. Let's see. Let's go back up a level for indices. So under index types, right, here's an example I was talking about before. So we're talking about the different index types, right? But here's gist index, right? The first time we see the word gist index, in modern doc, I would expect this to link to a gist index, either the table or something. They like to do a lot of this C section linking out, and it happens usually later. I like to see links to the actual thing itself, right? Where this would be a reference page about a gist index. The other problem that came up on this page that I saw is, for example, here's that assumed knowledge. Right? Brin indexes, a shorthand for block range indexes, store summaries about the values stored in a consecutive physical block range of a table. Now, I happen to know now, having worked with Postgres a lot, that the physical block range of a table means the physical block range on disk. And a little bit about what that looks like, right? So I can just make sense of that statement. If I was relatively new, though, to indices and I was trying to, what's the physical block range of a table? What is that? This is where there's that assumed knowledge that you know a bunch about how databases store data on disk and then how disks kind of work and the physical block ranges. I mean, I'm probably not even getting the concepts exactly right, but I have some idea. But for someone who is new, this sentence ends up making no sense and there's no link to helping people out. And so I think it would be really good for the doc. Not that anybody's going to do this. This is just my review or anything like that. If you want to understand your doc or things to do, especially when this is in learning material, right? This is the learning material section right here, right? This is just index types, right? If we go back to the part we're in right here is, let me go up. Go up, chapter 11. We're just doing indexes, right? This is all in the learning doc. I would think it would be good to assume people may not know. People aren't going to read this whole thing in order. They're going to go read about indexes, and then I don't know what a physical block range is. So give me a link to a physical block range. All right. And then, did I have any other thing? Oh, so here's an example of, again, a lot of assumed knowledge and not always having the doc that meets certain standards about introductions and goes to complicated examples, right? I've talked about this before with full text search, right? About how I think the documentation for full text search is rough and it makes it hard to use. So they have this section on like a vector, 2TS vector, right? And then they show kind of what the 2TS vector does. They've already talked about tokens and they've already talked about lexemes, I think, earlier, right? If we go earlier, because we're already at 12.3. So I'm not going to fault them on that, right? We're skipping right into the middle of the doc, right? They talk about what is a document and what is text matching, and they've talked about that stuff. But then we're talking about I think we were in parsing documents, right? But they go right into this, a whole bunch of more complicated examples. There's almost no links on this page. There's this one, right? But this is a good, if you want to look at an example of a page that's hard for a developer to get their head around, I would say this one is. The specific thing I wanted to point out here, though, is you're introduced to 2TS query, and then so that's the parsing queries. It turns out PostgreSQL provides the function 2TS query, plain 2TS query, phrase to TS query, and web search to TS query for converting the query to the TS query data type. That actually makes sense if you've read the other doc, except for the part that we've now got four different query types, parsers that take your search phrase and turn it into a query. And then this is the entire explanation you get for those different types with no instance of how the operators work. 2TS query offers access to more features than plain TS query or phrase to TS query, but is less forgiving about its input. Web search to TS query is a simplified version of 2TS query with an alternative syntax similar to the one used by web search engines. So this is the one that gave Paul Ramsey and I fits. What is that alternative syntax? Right? So there is no table that says here's the operators and here's how they work and here's how they and here's the operators, and here's how they work for each of the different query types. There's just a couple of examples of each, and then you're done, right? And so there's like this using an alternative syntax. It also recognizes certain operators, right? So it doesn't actually go through and tell you what those operators are. So this is an example, and so this should have been caught, I think, during the documentation submission phase and said, you need to actually tell us all these different types. Because it's actually quite hard as a developer to know what to use and understand the difference between these. You end up doing this whole, like, the blind people in the elephant, like, feeling around and figuring out that it's an elephant, that analogy. And this is that same thing where, you use the debugger and some tests, and you're like, oh, I think it operates this way, and I think that operates this way. So this is the one that upsets me the most, if in case you couldn't tell. Because I really love this feature. It's an awesome feature. It just needs a little bit of better doc. And I can't read the C code to figure it out. So I think, let's see if I went through and showed all the things I wanted to show. Oh no, I didn't do the submit correction, right? So, which is awesome on every page. So let's go back to the doc. So here we are on the index types. So like, for example, right, here we go. So submit correction. So we're on the index types where I didn't like that there was no explaining of a physical block range. And so I could say, use this form to document an issue. Please add a link to... Oh, now I can't even remember, you guys. Does anybody remember? Is anybody on YouTube actually watching? Does remember what it actually said? Where was it? Index. Oh yeah. Physical block range of a table. Let's go forward again. Please add a link to physical block range of a table. Hold on. Let's make that print. Right. So I can do this. Can you please add a link to an explanation for under the Brin index? This is not explained in the index and might be confusing to new users. Thanks. And that sends an email to the mailing list saying, hey, folks, this sends it to this list. And then maybe somebody will do something about it, maybe somebody won't. But at least you have a submit correction on every page. I highly recommend this for, if it's possible. It's kind of a harder feature to do. You need someone to do it because you have to have links to the pages and an email server and all that other fun stuff. But this is actually a really great way. I actually like, if you submit this, it actually creates a bug. And then you tell the person, here's the bug we just created on your behalf. Follow the cue on what happens, or give more flavor there, or be part of the discussion. That's a great way to get your developer community more excited and feel more a part of your project, application developer community. And this is why I keep saying application developers, is because they see up here at the top of the links, they have developers. These are actually for people who are going to develop PostgreSQL, right? Like, so I have to keep clarifying by saying application developers. I think that's all I wanted to say. I like that they have a code of conduct everywhere. That's good. I think that's it, right? Oh, there's no task-based doc, right? Yeah, they don't. And I don't blame them. I don't think that... I mean, they could do it. I'm a little surprised they don't have a task-based doc for DBAs. Ooh, you know what else they do have, though? Which is really good? They have a whole getting started section, right? So they have a whole little tutorial right here, which is good. I would actually call that out, and I would actually break it out a little bit, and put that actually... it's good that it's in here, but it might get buried. If a suggestion for this would it be to have them getting started right up here that just points to that section in the doc, right? So that people who wanted to get started could get started right away. Other than that, I think we're done with the PostgreSQL site review. It's a mature project again, and I think that is influencing a lot of what we're seeing here. I don't think there's a dedicated doc team for this project, or there is a docs mailing list, but I don't think there's a dedicated docs team. And they serve a diverse group of users, so I wasn't really expecting it to be application focused. Anyway, those are the points. I think I'm kind of done. I would love more feedback on what you think I should or shouldn't be doing in these sessions, and if this is helpful at all. I think next, I'm going to do one more before any of the feedback comes in. I've already committed myself to doing one more. And the next one I'm going to be doing probably a week from today is the Django site, because I've been recently using Django, learning it, using it. I'm going to show the Django site and maybe a little bit of the Mozilla Developer Network, because I actually think the Mozilla Developer Network has the best Django tutorial out there. Other than that, hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday, what if there's any left of it for you, or the beginning of your Thursday if you woke up super early in Asia and wanted to watch this. And we'll see you on Friday, because on Friday we're going to talk about PG Tile Serve, which is one of the new vector tile servers that has come out, built by our own Paul Ramsey, with doc help and assistance from Kat from my team, and we'll be showing how easy it can be to serve up vector tiles from PostGIS. All right, have a great day, everyone. Bye.